Hello, and welcome to Cape Ann ARTWaves, a member program of 1623 Studios here in Gloucester, Massachusetts. ARTWaves delves into the working life of our artists in the community. My name is Jacqueline Ganem DeFalco, and I co-host and co-produce this show along with my fellow artist colleague, Christine Fisher, who you see on the alternate weeks. We're so excited to announce that ARTWaves has received over 11,000 views on YouTube since we began, and we have interviewed over 50 artists for our show. We'd like to thank our generous sponsors, Prince Insurance Agency, M. Christine Fisher, visual artist, the McDermott McCarthy team at Gibson Sotheby's International Realty, and the Common Crow. And we'd like to acknowledge our partners, Sea Arts and 1623 Studios. We could not do the show without them. We're very excited that we already have enough sponsors lined up for 2022 to carry our show forward. So this is our news for the end of the year in December. This is our last episode of 2021. Today, I'm going to introduce David Arsenault, who's based today in Rockport, Massachusetts, with a gallery right there in Dock Square. David was born in upstate New York, an area very familiar to me. Schenectady, right out of Albany, and found his way to Cape Ann in 2014 with his wife, Reverend Sue Koehler-Arsenault, with the goal of opening a gallery here. He did so in March of 2015 on Bearskin Neck, and then moved to Dock Square in December of 2016. David was first captivated by art in school in 1970 when he discovered a reproduction of Edward Hopper's painting Gas, which we're going to flash up on the screen. And this was in a grade school library book. But it really wasn't until the 90s, after another career, more than 20 years later, that a professor at a graphic arts program reintroduced him to Hopper's work, and he felt decisively compelled to study painting. The early influence had its effect on him to the degree that the Wall Street Journal once wrote that Mr. Arsenault's paintings, some of them could pass for Edward Hopper. He studied painting at the University of Albany, New York. Since he first began showing his work in 1994, David has had or participated in hundreds of local, regional, and national exhibitions, including in New York, Chicago, Vermont, Connecticut, and many others around Massachusetts. His oil paintings, G-clay prints, and reproductions are all found in private and corporate collections across the US and around the world. Beyond his own work, he and his wife have engaged deeply in their communities. David was co-director of the Schenectady, New York Oak Room Artists, one of the oldest membership by invitation artist associations in the US, and today is part of the Rockport Art Association. And of course, his wife is the pastor of the Annisquam Village Church. So today I would like to welcome David Arsenault.
Thank you, Jackie. Nice to be here, and thank you for the nice introduction. We do love it.
It's always fun to introduce a fellow upstate New York person. found their way to Cape Ann, right?
Thank God, yeah.
Yes. So let's just get down to basics here, David. Let's talk about your background, what brought you to Cape Ann, and how you really started your artistic journey. And you might even mention your mother in this story, because I believe you said she had a little bit of influence on you along the way.
Oh, and my father as well.
Okay.
Cape Ann wasn't even on my radar, I'm embarrassed to say, for most of my adult career. I had this Cape Cod fetish almost. That was the first Cape I fell in love with, and that's where I went, in part because that's where Hopper spent his summers. I wanted to see the world that he had been seeing and painting. And then after what turned out to be my last exhibition in upstate New York, and probing into real estate pricing for opening a gallery there, it became apparent to me that the pricing was ridiculous for gallery space leasing. And that triggered some deep thinking about what the future would look like. I liked showing in other people's galleries as part of the whole, but I wanted to see what would happen if I had a whole body of work to offer to people all at once, and to do that on a regular basis. And so the 2013 vacation my wife and I took here, staying in Gloucester and spending a lot of time in Rockport, getting to know the art scene, getting to know the artists themselves, getting some artists to be very open about their business experiences, even sharing things such as paintings sold and dollars made, was really very important in helping us start thinking a little bit beyond what we had been thinking about and where we were thinking about the next big adventure in life going to be. And it ultimately led to us making that big leap, a lot of trust, a lot of faith to move here in 2013.
That's great. Can we go back to actually your interest in painting and how that began?
Painting itself didn't really become a thing for me other than some dabbling in high school art classes. I was exposed to drawing in grade school. I had a friend who was very proficient with a pencil, and that kind of intrigued me. But I never really spent a huge amount of time in drawing or art making up until high school, when it was part of the studies that I was taking. And I became interested more because I enjoyed what I was doing, and I became reasonably good on the high school scale. But it really wasn't until I finally put it back on the radar in the 90s, 1990 to be exact, that I thought I would study art from a practical standpoint, and graphic design was the first place I went because I felt I could make a living doing that. It didn't at the time seem to be possible to make a living as a painter. But that exposure to graphic design in the 90s allowed me the experience of being in classes of studio art and classes of painting and drawing and two-dimensional design, all of which involved creating things by hand, which you can't do anymore in most art classes, at least in the graphics world. And that introduced me to a professor who put me face to face with Edward Hopper again after all those years. A study on perspective, one of his paintings, specifically one from Gloucester on Prospect Street. And I went immediately to the library after class and pulled out whatever I could find on Hopper, because I thought, there's that guy again. I know him, and I need to know more about him now.
That's great. So I see some of your great work behind you, which will give us a hint. But let's talk about style. I found it really interesting in your artist statement in your bio that you don't like to be really put into a corner in terms of defining your style. And you mention all kinds of things that are sort of like your style: hyperrealism, American realism, photorealism, but none of those labels are really you. So talk about your style from your perspective.
Yeah. Isms are never a big thing for me. I don't try to ism any artist. I recognize realism, and I recognize impressionism, and I recognize some other types of styles. But I like an artist to just kind of stand on their own. And I feel that I don't fit into any of those boxes exactly. American realism is probably the closest approximity to what I think I do. But my goal really is just to take the world that I live in the way that I think I see it, and the way I, as best as I can determine, feel it, and to present it to you for consideration. I get to hold up these little mini versions of the world, put them on my walls, and say, well, what do you think? What do you feel? How do you respond to color? How do you respond to light? How do you respond to subject matter? And that allows it to be a conversation, which to me is what good art should be, is an invitation to people to engage themselves in the world they live in. And to then go from there, perhaps to have a different kind of experience of the world they live in after they've had that engagement.
We're going to flash up one of your other pieces here, which I think you did in 1995, the big picture.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good one for you to discuss a little bit how you began to differentiate your work from Hopper, who was obviously your biggest influence. So love to get your perspective on that, because there are many artists I've interviewed and artists here in Cape Ann who clearly Hopper was an influence for all different reasons. And yet you still need your own kind of place in that artistic universe. So maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah. It was the thing about Hopper that is most intriguing to me was looking at his paintings made me feel like he was a sibling or a clone of some sort in terms of how he saw the world, how he felt about the people and the places and the things in his world. And I thought by looking at that it would be really cool to be able to create something that could allow other people to have the kind of experience that I had in looking at it. And so that was what I wanted most. And realism was definitely going to be the path. And like Hopper, I was drawn to dramatic displays of light and shadow and trying to create what to me felt like a moment in time, frozen in some way, for you to pause and wonder, are you arriving after something has happened or maybe before something happens? And what does that feel like to you? How are you experiencing this scene, given how it may provoke those kinds of thoughts and feelings? And I thought that it was something that the drive-in for me, because of the world I lived in, was something that I remembered as a child being very provocative, driving along in the back seat or riding along in the back seat, my parents driving, seeing those glowing screens at night and seeing all this darkness around them and seeing them in their monumentality and seeing that there were people clustered around in their vehicles. It just was very interesting to me, very exciting. And I had the experience of a drive-in theater in that vicinity of where I lived that led me to want to do that. Even though I never had gone to that theater at night, I thought I could make it a picture of what that might be like. And I tied in the screen showing advertisement because that was the big way that drive-ins kept going in the day, was, selling hot dogs, selling sodas and all that good stuff.
And, I love the title, The Big Picture, because it feels like it has many meanings, right? The big picture of life, a lot of different things come to mind when I see that. So you've really segued directly into the next thing we wanted to talk about. I want to dig more into you had a very robust artist statement, and you really talk about the first thing you said was that the goal is to present something that looks and feels as real to me as the world we live in, but is filtered through my feelings, my imagination, my memories. If it's done well, it serves as an opening with the same purpose, a very personal connection for the viewer to make. So we're going to show a few other paintings here, which you've wanted to use as examples of that. So the first one is going to be the approaching storm. Actually there's two, and then the other one will be Cape Ann mornings. So either order, but I just thought you could elaborate further on the way you filtered those experiences. I think that's rather interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the Cape Ann morning piece represents the very first piece I did when I was still living in upstate New York, because I am a studio painter. I was able to do that while I was living there. And that was inspired by that visit I mentioned in 2013 when we came on vacation and kind of formulated our plan that if we're going to go anywhere and have a big adventure, this was going to be the place. And we were staying at a local motel at the time. And I remember going for the walk on the back shore with Sue and seeing these beautiful, substantial houses as you're coming around from the Good Harbor side of the Bass Rocks area, and just seeing the road leading up to those houses and seeing them perched there on the edge of the cliff, and just thinking about what it would be like to have an experience of waking up and looking out your window and seeing the ocean, what it would be like to be bathed in this kind of ethereal light experience that I was experiencing at the time, that I thought I felt at the time. And I wanted it to be something that was compelling, that you would want to have your morning on Cape Ann. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's what that particular experience represented. And
yeah. No, that's great. I can appreciate that because I have memories like that of places that I visited. And the approaching storm, we're going to show that.
Yeah, that's a little bit more of a stretch in terms of creating something that I've seen almost occur, but never have seen occur. It's part of my continuing exploration of motif number one. I've done 6 paintings of the motif since I moved here. Purposeful. Initially, I thought I would do one every year, but I missed a year. And the idea behind this particular one was I have presented the motif in the past, often in very idyllic circumstances. And yet in the summertime, it's not always idyllic. We seem to have this tendency to miss our storms in the summer. They go off coast most of the time for some reason. But I thought it would be more interesting to give the motif an opportunity to experience a summer storm up close and personal, not causing damage or destruction or anything like that, but just to really create a lot of sense of drama and foreboding almost to this beloved icon of Rockport. And it was a fun painting to make, and it was one that I was kind of pleased with what it feels like to me. Hopefully, it matches up in some ways with how people experience the threat of storm or the possibility of storm and the beloved Rockport.
It's a great perspective. Like it really feels like you're looking up at the motif, which forces you to look up at the sky. So I think there's something about it. It's very active. I mean, you can definitely feel exactly what it is that you were talking about. So in speaking of feeling, I mean, one of the things that you said that you really are picky about what you paint. And that you really won't make a painting unless you feel a strong emotional response to that. So maybe you could suggest something that it was, you had a really strong response to, and you just said, I have to paint this.
Well, one of the pieces that I shared with you was one I called Apartment by the Sea. That was a painting that I was living at a time of transition between my first marriage and what became my second marriage. And I was living in an apartment for the first and only time of my adult life. And I lived in a place that I didn't consider wonderful. And there was a lot of tension for me around having my children there part-time and not there part-time. I mean, there were a lot of ways of being unsettled, including the neighbors in the neighborhood itself. Not terrible, but just not great either. But it was a place of transition. And there was one thing that gave me comfort, and that was the way that the light streamed in the morning and through those front three windows and gave me this sense of warmth and gave me this sense of everything's going to be okay, ultimately. But I also looked out on a parking lot, and that didn't inspire me. But the more I thought about the idea of how I wanted to use that apartment room in a painting, the more I pictured myself at a place I wanted to be, which was by the shore. And so I decided to put myself there, which you can do as an artist. And I moved the apartment complex to Martha's Vineyard so that I could have that experience and then create a different sense of what that space could mean, not just to me, but to anyone that looked at it.
Oh, no, it's great. I mean, I think that goes to what we were discussing earlier, which is that you can use your imagination to complement what you're actually seeing. And yet, really, when you look at it, it looks very real. I mean, there's no question that could be a place, right? So no doubt about that. The other one, which I really love that we're going to show here, is Overdue Conversation, which it's hard to actually look at that painting and think that there aren't actually people sitting in those chairs the way you have that done. So let's chat about that one a little bit.
I took a house that I drive past on a regular basis daily between Gloucester and Rockport, and it spoke to me on a regular basis as if there was a story inherent in that house that I needed to tell. And I didn't have any particular idea, but I just allowed it to gestate by looking at it every day, going back, taking pictures so that I could look at it at home when I wasn't driving past it, just to try to get a sense for where I thought the story was. And ultimately, as last year unfolded with the pandemic and with the social unrest we had and with the political divides we have, it became apparent to me that there needed to be an opportunity, a place where we could have, whether it be individuals, whether it be cultures, whether it be societies at large, a place where we could have safe, peaceful conversations. And I felt by moving the house to the seaside, and giving people an opportunity to just sit down and have a face-to-face conversation with whomever they needed to have that conversation with, that perhaps something good could come of it. And
I like that a lot. I can hear that. I can see that in that painting. So I think it's important now to segue into the way you paint, your process, because you did refer to this earlier, and it's actually pretty critical to who you are and what you're about. The fact that you really are a studio painter. So all these pieces we've been looking at could easily have been plein air, right? If you were sitting out there looking at those houses, but they're not at all. And I'd like you to talk about what it means to be a studio painter and a little bit about your process.
Sure. To me, the only thing that means differently about being a studio painter than versus a plein air painter is that I'm fully in control of my environment. I can work at a pace that feels appropriate to the person that I am, and that is pretty slow at just about everything I do. That's a gift my mom gave me, which sometimes I don't consider to be a gift. But I've had to find a way, since I did want to do this, I had a great calling almost to do this painting thing. And I had to find a way to do it. And studio painting was the only thing that made sense after some attempts, including with Charles Movalli, to paint in plein air. So I started working in my studio using a palette that was introduced to me by one of my professors at the University at Albany, someone who was alleged to be the stepdaughter of Mark Rothko, the abstract expressionist. The palette she gave was it made so much sense to me, and it was so specific that I thought it would allow me to have exactly what I wanted, an opportunity not to think so hard about the technical part of what I was doing, but to focus on what I was putting onto the canvas, and to do that at a pace that worked for me. And so I'm still using that same palette today, now 26 years later. And it still allows me to not think hard about that part of it and to stay focused on what I think is going to make the most sense for the painting to convey what I think I feel and what I think I see. And it involves slowly applying multiple, could be 2, could be 3, could be 4 layers of paint, and working around parts, depending on how I mix my colors. For example, perhaps today I'm painting the ocean. Tomorrow I'm going to be painting the building. I might be painting the foreground. I may be painting the background. I may be painting objects. I may be painting people. But I keep working around the painting depending on the stage of dryness, and work on different things and break it up in a way that makes sense not only to how I think, but also to how I get my colors to last as long as they can before they're no longer useful.
I see. Yes. Well, I think this is a good place for us to show your studio. Getting toward the end here, but I like to talk about subject matter in terms of maybe the buckets of things that you paint, because you do paint a lot of different subject matter, but maybe you could just describe some of the things. You probably spend more time painting certain types of subjects than others. And so I think just so that our viewers have a good sense, now that they've taken a quick look at your studio, some of the things that you focus on.
Yes. At this point, I'm still considering myself in the exploratory stages of Cape Ann art. I'm still intrigued and fascinated and compelled by what I see. And so part of my desire to paint Cape Ann scenes is to try to find places that I feel are visually exciting to me and emotionally exciting to me, and that I think allow me to describe the personality of the place, which I think is part of what people are experiencing when they come here, whether they live here and appreciate or whether they come here to appreciate. I love the fact that this place speaks to people in such a distinct way and such a deep personal way. And so that's, to me, one of the most exciting things. It's not just about the picture making, but what I think the picture can do in terms of connecting to other people and maybe bringing them in their place they love in a way that they haven't seen or experienced it before, like painting an ocean scene in the winter when people usually are not here other than us locals. And that allows for the conversation to go on and to open the door to people thinking about Rockport existing all the time, for example, or Gloucester or whatever, a place that they love, and it has new personalities that they didn't even know. And here it is. And what do you think about that? What do you feel about that? Well, another subject matter area that has once again become very intriguing to me is interiors. And in particular, I had an opportunity in the recent past to put together a painting inspired by the Shaolin, our performance center here in Rockport. And that came along by, first of all, just seeing it for the first time, peering through the windows and seeing the piano on stage and wanting to get in there and see what that felt like. And then getting the opportunity to do so at concerts, and then talking to the director of the Shaolin and getting his permission to go in and spend some time there while they were having a staff meeting elsewhere in the building, and just wander and just look and see and feel and take pictures to try to help me with all of the particularities of that place. It has such personality, such details that are interesting and exciting. And I ended up deciding 3 years after I had that experience to actually do the painting. And I spent more time on that painting than I did any other painting I've ever worked on in my career. I was actually working on it for 3 months. And it's a very large painting, 36 by 48 inches. And it was in part complicated not only by all the perspective in it, but by the fact that the light, I wanted to use only the light coming in from the big 40-foot window. And so there is no light on the inside of the building artificially. And it's gradating all the way across from the windows to the receding shadows in the background. And I wanted that to be part of the story so that you could feel like you were getting there early as the one attendee gifted with the opportunity to be there for your favorite concert performer. And you have arrived and you see the stage set, and what does that feel like to you? How is that experience going to be for you?
Yeah. Well, it definitely conveys that. There's no question about it. So I'm just going to start to wrap this up today. And one of the ways that I like to sort of end is to talk about patrons. I think patrons are so important. They really influence us to do things that are a little bit different sometimes, especially if it's a commission. So maybe you could relay a story and an example of a commission that you did that maybe took you in a new direction or was particularly memorable.
Yeah. Well, when I think of memorable, there's one I just finished that was memorable in its own way, because the family was great personality and very grateful for the painting. But the one that comes to mind most in the forefront is one of a family in Gloucester who came to me who has a lake property in New Hampshire. And they liked my style, and they said to me, "We'd like you to do a painting of our home in New Hampshire, but we want you to stay there. And we'd like you to be there for as long as you want to get a sense for what we have and what it feels like to you, what you see. But we don't want you to feel like you have any direction on this. We want you to do whatever you want. And we went to this beautiful house, Sue and I, she was invited to, and we got a chance to stay 3, 4, 5 days and to just bask in the glow of this amazing setting and enjoy the beautiful amenities of this house, and to have the seeds formed and sprouting for this painting, which was a large 24 by 48 inch painting, and a surprise gift for the woman who's owner of the home, whose family home it was. So we did an unveiling for her here, and we had an opportunity since. We've been invited back on multiple occasions for Sue and I again to just stay, because they're such really warm family and such good people. And they really have created a memorable experience beyond memorable experiences. If anybody ever told me that a commission was going to be offering me an opportunity to have a vacation on a bi-yearly basis or every year, I would have said, no, it ain't going to happen.
I think you'd have a lot more people entering the field of art if they knew those were some of the bonuses.
I think you're right.
All right. Well, David, I think it's important now that our viewers find out how they can find you, what your sort of preferred way of being found and communication is. So why don't you share that, and we'll also put those credentials up on the screen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The best way to find me, because it's the most fun for me, is to get to meet you in person. And that's easily done right here in Rockport in Dock Square at 8 Dock Square. I'm right near where the Christmas tree is about ready to be propped up, and where they do the 4th of July Constitution reading. So come down to see me in downtown Rockport. And if that's not doable, you can find me on my website. I have the same URL since I've had in 1998 is when I got it, ARTWaves.com. You can also find me on Facebook, and you can also find me on Instagram as well at ARTWaves.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are so happy to have had this opportunity today to speak with David Arsenault from Rockport, who's active in the Rockport Art Association in our community here on Cape Ann. So thank you so much. And we'd like to once again point our viewers to 1623studios.org, and following screen describing all the various ways that you can find this broadcast on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter. And also, if you sign up for the weekly C-Arts e-blast, you'll be among the first to know when this airs. So David has some shows coming up in early December, so we hope you look out for him. Once again, thank you to our sponsors and our musicians and everyone else that has made Cape Ann ARTWaves possible in 2021. This is our last episode for 2021. Thank you so much.